Somewhere in the mountains of northern China, a man is carrying stones uphill. He's been doing it since before dawn. The wind cuts sideways across the ridge, and the path beneath him is barely a path at all. Just a line of packed dirt worn into the slope by the feet of thousands of men who came before him. He doesn't know it, but the wall he's building will still be standing 2,000 years from now. He won't live to see it finished. Most of the men beside him won't either. This is the Great Wall of China. Not the postcard, not the symbol, the reality. Built across centuries, across dynasties, across terrain that didn't want to be built on, by people who often had no choice.
Before we go any further, I want to clear up one of the most persistent myths about this structure. The Great Wall is not a single wall. It was never built all at once by one emperor with one grand plan. What we call the Great Wall is actually a collection of walls, trenches, watchtowers, garrisons, and earthworks constructed, abandoned, rebuilt, and extended by different dynasties over roughly 2,000 years. Some sections overlap. Some run parallel to each other, miles apart. Others were left to crumble and forgotten entirely. The wall you see in photographs today, those dramatic stone and brick fortifications winding across mountain ridges, those are mostly Ming Dynasty construction from the 1300s to the 1600s. But the story begins much earlier. In this video, I'm using modern AI tools to reconstruct what these walls and the landscapes around them may have looked like at different points in history, drawing from archaeological evidence, historical records, and surviving sections of the wall itself. Some of what you'll see is interpretation. Where the record is uncertain, I'll say so. But the goal is the same as always, to step as close to the past as the evidence allows and try to feel what it was actually like to be there.
The earliest border walls in northern China date back to the Warring States period, around the 5th to 3rd centuries BC, when rival kingdoms built defensive barriers against each other and against nomadic groups pressing in from the northern steppe. These weren't the towering stone structures we picture today. They were walls of packed earth, rammed earth technically, built by pounding layers of soil, gravel, and sometimes reed or straw between wooden frames until they hardened into something dense enough to slow a cavalry charge. Then came Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unify China, around 221 BC. He's the figure most people associate with the wall's origin. After unification, he ordered existing northern walls linked and extended into a single defensive frontier. The scale of this project was extraordinary. Hundreds of thousands of laborers were conscripted, soldiers, peasants, prisoners, convicts, and sent to some of the harshest terrain in the empire. Mountain passes, arid plateaus, edges of desert. Conditions were brutal. Temperatures in the northern frontier could swing from scorching heat to freezing cold, depending on season and altitude. Supply lines stretched thin across difficult ground. Food, tools, and building materials had to be hauled by hand or animal across distances that made logistics a crisis in itself. How many people died during the Qin Wall campaigns? Historians disagree, and the honest answer is we don't know with precision. Ancient Chinese sources describe enormous suffering and mass death among laborers, but specific numbers vary widely and are difficult to verify. What we can say is that the human cost was severe enough to become embedded in Chinese cultural memory for centuries, in poetry, in folklore, in stories passed down about families torn apart by conscription. The wall was not just infrastructure, it was a wound. I want to slow down and talk about what building this wall actually involved, because the engineering is extraordinary, and so is the physical toll. In the earlier dynasties, construction meant rammed earth.
Imagine teams of men working on an exposed ridgeline, hauling baskets of soil and gravel up steep inclines, packing it between timber frames and tamping it down layer by layer with heavy wooden tools. Each layer had to be compressed until it was nearly as hard as stone. This process was slow, exhausting, and relentless. In some desert sections, builders mixed in local materials, tamarisk branches, reed, even sand, adapting to whatever the landscape offered. By the Ming Dynasty, construction methods had advanced significantly. Brick and cut stone replaced rammed earth along the most strategically important sections, particularly those closer to Beijing. Kilns were built near construction sites to fire bricks locally, and long supply caravans carried lime, stone, and provisions to remote locations. Watchtowers were placed at regular intervals. Some sources suggest every few hundred meters along certain stretches, serving as observation posts, signal stations, and small garrisons.
The signal fire system deserves its own moment. When a threat was spotted along the frontier, soldiers would light fires on the watchtower, smoke by day, flame by night. The next tower would see it and light its own. Within hours, a warning could travel hundreds of kilometers along the wall's length, reaching military commanders and, eventually, the capital. It was one of the most effective long-distance communication systems of the pre-modern world. But all of this depended on people. The laborers who built the wall, the soldiers who manned it, the supply workers who kept both groups alive in terrain that offered very little on its own. Many of these workers were conscripted peasants, pulled from their fields and families for months or years at a time. Others were convicts or prisoners of war. Their lives on the frontier were defined by hard physical labor, minimal shelter, and constant exposure to the elements. In winter, the northern sections of the wall sit in some of the coldest, most wind-battered landscapes in East Asia. It may have felt, at times, like building at the edge of the world.
So what was the wall actually for? The simple answer is defense, a barrier against nomadic cavalry raids from the northern steppe, primarily groups like the Xiongnu during the Han Dynasty, and later the Mongols and various Turkic peoples. But the full answer is more complicated. The wall was never an impenetrable barrier. It couldn't be. The frontier was simply too long, the terrain too varied, and the forces manning it too stretched. What the wall did was slow movement, channel it toward controlled passes and gates, and provide an early warning system through its watchtowers and signal fires. It turned the open steppe border into something that could be monitored and managed, at least in theory. But the wall also served a political purpose. It was a statement of imperial authority, a visible physical line drawn across the landscape that said, this is where civilization begins, and this is where the empire's reach extends. For the dynasties that built and maintained it, the wall projected power not just outward toward potential enemies, but inward toward their own population. It demonstrated the state's capacity to organize labor, move resources, and impose order on a continental scale. That dual function, defense and message, is part of what makes the wall so enduring as a symbol. It was practical and symbolic at the same time, built to stop armies and to declare ambition.
One thing I keep coming back to is how the wall changed hands, fell apart, and was rebuilt again and again. After the Qin, the Han Dynasty extended and maintained frontier walls, pushing them further into the western deserts to protect trade routes, what we now call the Silk Road. Some of these western sections were built in incredibly remote terrain, and surviving remnants in the Gobi Desert today are little more than eroded ridges of packed earth, barely recognizable as construction. Centuries later, during periods of division and instability, large sections of the wall were simply abandoned. Nomadic groups crossed freely. The frontier shifted. It wasn't until the Ming Dynasty, after the Mongol Yuan dynasty had ruled China and been overthrown, that wall building resumed on a massive scale. The Ming treated the northern frontier as an existential concern, and their construction campaigns produced the most iconic sections of the wall we know today: the stone and brick fortifications near Beijing, Badaling, Mutianyu, and Jinshanling. Even during the Ming period, the wall was not one continuous line. It was a system: walls, towers, garrisons, ditches, natural barriers like rivers and mountain bridges, all integrated into a broader frontier defense strategy. Thinking of it as a single ribbon of stone stretching across the map is tempting, but it doesn't match the reality. The reality was messier, more fragmented, and far more human.
Standing back from all of this, what strikes me most is not the wall's length or its age, but the sheer weight of human effort behind it. Millions of people, across more than 2,000 years, building, repairing, manning, and supplying a structure that stretched across some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. Some of them were soldiers, carrying out orders. Some were prisoners with no choice at all. Some were farmers who never made it home. The Great Wall endures today as one of the most recognizable monuments on the planet. But monuments have a way of making us forget the people who built them. The wall is extraordinary. It is also a reminder that extraordinary things often come at extraordinary cost, and that the people who paid that cost are the ones history remembers least. What I keep wondering is this: if you could stand on the wall during any single moment in its history, any dynasty, any season, any stretch of frontier, when and where would you choose? I'd love to hear your answer in the comments. And if this is your first time here, consider subscribing. There's a lot more history to reconstruct together.